I'm happy to have you back for this interview on Africa 24. Nardos Bekele-Thomas, the Chief Executive Officer of the African Union Development Agency NEPAD, is our guest for today's interview. She'll be talking to us on the sidelines of the 30th Afreximbank annual meetings here in Accra. Thank you, ma'am, for joining us.
Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to be with you at Africa 24, which is our media actually. Africa 24 and African Union Development Agency, they're just one entity, working together. Yeah.
Always a pleasure, ma'am.
Thank you.
So we'll be asking you the first question on the meeting. Afreximbank, through its 30th annual meetings, is equally celebrating 30 years of existence. Can you just tell us how you view their efforts in promoting trade in Africa and in providing opportunities on the continent?
Thank you very much. Yes, certainly, Afreximbank is one of the most, progressive banks for Africa that has really linked, financial sector activities with that of development, anchoring, its products and services on real development. And for us as African Union Development Agency, which is a very unique development agency that the member states created to make sure that all priority programs for Africa are implemented effectively, efficiently, and timely to realize the Vision 2063. It's really partnering with Afreximbank is normally a very organic partnership that we have. So we are very, very pleased with Afreximbank has done over the 30 years. Celebrating the progress gives us hope, and it's an inspiration, inspirational organization or financial sector for Africa. So we're so happy to be part of it. The discussions that took place the last 3 days have been very inspiring. They're going deep into the development challenges of Africa and the financial sector, and really looking at what kind of reform in terms of economic reforms, but also financial reforms the continent needs in order to make sure that it is at par with the ambitions that are set in Vision 2063.
So still talking about the efforts of Afreximbank, can you tell us, in the face of crisis, how do you think the bank has helped African economies recover and build back resilience?
Well, the Afreximbank, as it is an export-import bank, is mainly focusing on trade, but beyond trade, to facilitate trade, and is working really hand in hand with the AFCFTA Secretariat in making sure that the payments and settlements are smooth, and that is one of the cumbersome or one of the hindering blocks in terms of trade, but also helping countries in building infrastructure together with ADB, together with AUDA NEPAD, the PIDA program. It created the project development facility, which we are working together in terms of preparing infrastructure projects that are critical and crucial for the integration of African countries. You cannot, have an integrated market if there is no integrated infrastructure, and therefore we're working together on that, together with ADB and all the other financial institutions in the continent. And that is one aspect, but also in terms of building the value chain and supporting the SMEs and the bigger companies in bringing the business facilitation among the enterprises or companies, so that the bigger ones pool the intermediary factories and intermediary producing enterprises along the value chain. So this is a very interesting development in the continent, and it's a very key and vital and core function of private sector development, and creating the engine of growth in the continent. And therefore, for us, Afreximbank, what it's doing together with ADB is critical and very important. And we need them to make sure that the agenda that we have for development becomes a reality.
Talking about that agenda, Delivering the vision and building prosperity for Africans. That's the theme of the Afreximbank annual meetings. Tell us how far this goal can be achieved given increased insecurity and instability on the continent in many African countries in West Africa, for example.
Well, the first thing to understand is really to understand the sources of this conflict and this instability. In many cases, these instabilities are caused by inequality, by poverty, and also by natural disasters that really displace people and create calamities, both to the economy, but also to, destroy the social fabrics of our continent. And therefore, addressing the root causes is critical and very important. And, it requires really a brave, determined, convicted measures. And this is what Afreximbank, ADB, and all the other partners are bringing today to make sure that we are in the long-term trajectory of development. Just last week or 2 weeks ago, in Egypt, we launched what we call the Nexus Project. And the Nexus Project really links, peace, security, and development, and humanitarian and development together, so that Africa stays in the long-term trajectory and does not wallow in crisis, and that crisis does not define Africa, but Africa is a wealthy country, and prosperity should define Africa. And therefore, we are really trying to address the root causes of this. So instability, yes, but if you address the root causes and take preventive measures, then we will surmount that. One of the things I always say is that for Africa, the most important critical element is to build the economy. We cannot afford not building the economy to make sure that we respond to the growing population. But also, expanding the economy is not enough, because we have seen in the middle income countries in the southern part of Africa that this growth has not trickled down to bringing decent life to everybody. Inequality is increasing while the growth rate is increasing. So inclusive growth is very critical. In order to bring inclusive growth, you need to expand the number of stakeholders in the economy. What does that mean? That means creating jobs for everybody, making sure that every single citizen lives a decent life. And that is why. And, in order to do that, governments really need an expanded economy. So they are all intertwined. So, and in this respect, what we are doing in terms of industrializing Africa is critical. Industrialization is the most critical element, but industrialization using a strategic management of it is critical, so that we are aligned, around the value chains, and we know the growth pillars, and there is trade among countries.
Yeah, let's focus on inclusive growth. Inclusive growth includes regional integration, it includes African integration. Can you tell us how this can be achieved, given that many African countries have not yet adopted visa-free regimes? To boost intra-African trade, to boost regional integration and inclusive growth, it comes with all of that. Governments have to put in visa-free regimes for people to be able to have free circulation. Can you tell us why are governments still reluctant to adopting visa-free regimes, and what can be done to address the situation?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We cannot have connectivity and integrated Africa if there are all these restrictions. The tariff barriers is something that we are trying to really dismantle using the AFCFTA. And certainly, for example, for the tariffs, in order to dismantle it, we have to give alternative strategies for countries that live on revenues that come from tariffs. And that is what we are doing with the AFCFTA and the AUC, trying to really see what is the impact of the African free trade, opening up borders and having a free flow of trade on the economies of the countries. If the economy depends on revenues coming from tariff, what are the alternative strategies, and how can we help countries, to really surmount this problem? And that's why Afreximbank has put in place this adjustment, fund, which is really an innovation, for countries to adjust. They need resources to diversify, their economies, and not depend solely on revenues that come from tariff. So these are the things that we are putting in place to make sure that, economies grow and they are comfortable enough to adopt the AFCFTA. Now, coming to visas, which you asked, I really am, an advocate of Africans having to move from one place to the other freely. West Africa does it, and whether we like it or not, because of the porous borders, illegal movements occur. And when it comes to a real formal legal movements, I do not see why we restrict people. Certainly, it goes back to the economies of the country and their confidence, the confidence level of welcoming others to come into their countries. But if there is an economic problem in a country, if there is inequality in the country, then it becomes very difficult for others to come in, even from the perspective of those that live in dire poverty in a country where there is growth. And I look at, the southern part of Africa and our middle income countries, where, the majority are really living in poverty, while others really have a well-to-do, at par. Actually, their living standards is at par with this modern world. That inequality creates, some kind of tension within the country. Then when, others come into that, they don't have that space, the economic space, and the opportunity space to accommodate others, and it creates a tension. So, when we create an economy, it has to be an economy that has that is expanded, so that, it can accommodate its own people and make sure that they participate in the economy and, are willing to bring others into that economy and integrate them into the economy so that they are contributors of that economy. And therefore, it's all intertwined. But, we need to address inequality, we need to address poverty within the national boundaries, and also, make sure that that continent is integrated so that, technical expertise, move, there is mobility, there is a transfer of knowledge, and there is, that kind of solidarity among countries, and belongingness. And we avoid xenophobic attacks, and we avoid, that individualist, approach, and has to be replaced with a Pan-African approach that is open to any African to work. In that respect, we are now we have launched actually, last time I was on this platform and talked about the Energize Africa program. The Energize Africa program is really trying to tackle the problem of unemployment among youth and empowering youth to be able to express their intellectual capacity, to express what they have in terms of expertise, in terms of their creativity, and integrate that into the socioeconomic process, so they are part and parcel of this process and not marginalized. And in order to do that, and also in order to kill so many birds at the same time, the first component is really trying to look at all those skilled, youth, and try to integrate them in the public service. Why in the public service? In my opinion, the public service has to be really populated by young ones, because we are building the Africa we want in the future, the Africa the young generation wants in the future. And who defines that? It should be the young people, the youth. So we are integrating youth in the public service. And in order to circumvent these wage bill restrictions, we're trying to build a big program where we would really map out all the expertise in Africa and make sure that they work in different countries, so there is no boundary. And in that way, we build Pan-Africanism. And that is in addition to the innovation hubs that we build, and also to the SMEs and startups, and really making AUDA NEPAD to be that unique development agency that would set standards and that would also be a quality assurance, entity for Africa's development.
In this process of building inclusive growth and Pan-Africanism, like you rightly said, we cannot be leaving out the diaspora. So tell us how leaders can strengthen connectivity between Africa and the diaspora.
It's very interesting because Afreximbank last year organized, remember in Barbados, where we met in Barbados, this wonderful, conference. And that conference has opened up the eyes of Africa and the eyes of Caribbeans, and also had really started building the bridge. So, this bridge is now being built. So the movement of goods, the movement of, people is something that we are promoting. The Africans outside Africa have so much to contribute to Africa. Their expertise, their skills could be used in the transformation process of Africa. And I think, Indians have done it, and other countries, Israel has done it. So we can have our Africans that are outside there for so many reasons, including the historical injustice of the past, but also the economic injustice of the current situation. But it's very important that we use their talents, we use their skills. There are more African doctors outside Africa than in Africa. There are more trained nurses outside Africa than Africa. There are more trained engineers outside Africa than Africa. And Africa has so much to offer. Africa is a paradise. They would like to come back if they're given, the opportunity and the conducive environment. So on our side, we need to make sure that we create that conducive environment for them to come and work and help their fellow Africans, because there is only one continent, which is Africa. But there is another continent outside Africa, which is Africa in the Caribbean. In Brazil, we just learned that we have got 125 million Black Africans living in Brazil. And, they would like to come to Africa. And we need to really also open up our hearts and try to see the expanded Africa beyond the continent that we consider to be Africa.
How do you assess so far the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals and of the African Union's Agenda 2063? Can you give an overview how you assess up to date the achievement of these goals?
Thank you very much. I think, most of the time we always see the glass, half full, But I think it's very important to understand, from my angle, after working for so many years, literally 40 years in this development thing, I sometimes get so frustrated because things have not shaped up the way, I would have liked them, because our goals are always ambitious, and they should be ambitious. If they're not goals, they're not really, but I think what I see, even in this conference, a mind shift in really appreciating ourselves, which wasn't like before, because we used to be told, okay, you are poor, you are this, you're that, and everything was dark about us. But now a revelation has come from within ourselves to consider ourselves to be really the powerhouse, to consider ourselves to be okay, to consider ourselves, yes, there are some things that we haven't done, but there are so many great things that have been done, like the progress that have been done over the last 30 years by Afreximbank is an inspiration, is really a hope. And in terms of where we are, Africa had moved up to this time when we had the COVID into a 2-digit growth by so many countries, right? And even today, the growth of Africa is higher than many developed countries. Africa is waking up in understanding that self-actualization, okay, is critical. Africa has waken up and said we need to be, on the driver's seat. We need to be leading our development. Africa has its vision, the unique vision that the continent has is our Vision 2063. Africa has its implementation plan. The 10-year implementation plan has been, gauged. There are some success stories in terms of poverty level, in terms of education, in terms of health or whatever. It's a mixed bag. But, still there is a progress. And, Africa is saying we are designing our next implementation plan. But that implementation plan should be the plan for all actors, be it multilateral, bilateral, or African institutions working for the development of Africa to have that common framework, to coordinate the activities within this common framework. This is a big achievement for Africa. So we are in the process of having a multi-stakeholder consultations with all actors, civil society, private sector, multilateral partners, and all this working on the same thing. We are designing that. Indicators will be set, and on a yearly basis, there will be a review. But that review is, guided by this common framework. So, so we have moved a lot in terms of bringing our products, instrument, in terms of building our systems to make sure that we're at an accelerated pace towards the transformation process.
Thank you, Mom. Thank you so much for always accepting our invite.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
We have to work very hard as Africans to accelerate the pace of getting to the Agenda 2063. It's on these words that we put an end to this interview. Thank you for watching us. We have more news coming up on Africa 24.